it's not so far-fetched that governments take your liberty, your life, your possessions. It's not crazy to think that the government that did that less than almost 100 years ago, around 300 miles away from this spot where we're talking in good old Texas of the USA, it's not so far-fetched that the government could do that here. The ability of the government to overreach lasts as long as the citizens allow it to. Welcome back to the Pinedo Brothers Podcast. I'm JP, and I got my brother,
Peter, right here.
We're the Pinedo Brothers, Catholic filmmaking brothers working to revitalize the world of Catholic art through film. And we hope that you're here to enjoy along with us. Because at first, I thought, let's have a real depressing, there's so much depressing things in the world going on, so many terrible things. And I thought, well, we should talk about those depressing, terrible things. But then I thought, I've had a tough day. And maybe some other people who are listening to our podcast might also have a tough day. So we wanted to talk about something more fun. We're filmmakers. And so what's more fun than talking about great movies? For filmmakers, that's about as good as it gets, right, Pete?
With a glass of whiskey.
With a glass of whiskey. Cheers. So without further ado, why don't we talk about some of our favorite films? But something that you and I do that I really enjoy is we talk about history. And what I would love to do is talk about some of our favorite films that are based on actual events, sort of historical films. Mm-hmm. And I think we can explain a little bit about why these films are great in our mind, and then what they got right historically, as far as we know. And then what are some of the things that maybe they took some artistic license with? What do you think, Pete?
Yeah, sounds good.
Great. So first up, we have Lawrence of Arabia, one of my favorite films. Peter, have you seen this one?
I have seen it. I think I've only seen it once or twice. It's a 3.5 hour long movie or something.
Yeah, it's an investment to watch this guy, but it's well worth it.
Yeah, I remember really liking it. Yeah, I just think that it, from what I recall, it really portrays it really delves into the world. You know, it paints a full picture. But I didn't realize, why is it one of your favorites? I didn't realize that.
Well, I think there's so many interesting things about this film, but one of the things that stands out to me first is how it was shot. Nowadays, we get excited about films in IMAX or, films shot on IMAX cameras. Chris Nolan's a big proponent of that. He's always speaking about how he's trying to push the limits of film instead of the digital type of look that people generally shoot on these days. He tries to shoot in that kind of IMAX, that full format. So a big old frame chunk of film. This was shot on 70 millimeter in its entirety, which is twice the size of what a normal film frame is. So it has twice the definition of what pretty much any other classic out there has. And it really shows on the screen. The colors are incredible. And the director takes full use of that by the incredible vistas that he translates. I'm not sure if Google's going to ping us for having this little trailer playing in the background while we're talking about it, but we'll hope not. I don't think they will. We'll see. But anyway, David Lean is a marvelous director that is at his full powers here. He not only captures cinematically the life of this era where you have an Englishman thrown into a conflict between warring Muslim tribes who manages to unite these tribes, something that no one's ever done, especially no Englishmen, and bring about a real change to the area. This is something that really happened. They do great service to how they portray Lawrence and the kind of crazy, tragic figure that he is. It is a masterpiece in every sense of the word. And it also is canceled because you've got Alec Guinness playing a Arab chieftain in brownface. So it's something that's definitely the world is cheaper now because this is a canceled film.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So aside from Alec Guinness, do you know how, well, let's put it this way. I had a history professor back at school who he used to advise on various, mostly documentaries, but some like historically based movies. And he used to say that filmmakers like to have a historian as a consultant on their films so that they could have someone to ignore writing the script. So do you know of Lawrence of Arabia? Is that pretty, how historically accurate is that story there? He seems like a fascinating character.
Well, it's pretty accurate if you look, it depends what source you look at. If you look at Lawrence's autobiography, it's pretty accurate. They really followed that source material quite closely. But Lawrence obviously is going to tell things from his perspective. And he was at odds quite a bit with the British government. The UK government and him didn't see eye to eye, and many times he was kind of a thorn on their side on some occasions. So I'm sure it's biased to Lawrence because that's his perspective, but they do maintain that sort of richness. And that's something that they really try to capture, is because I think what the filmmakers realized is that if we stay true to the source material, we have a better shot of making a rich story, a full world. And so they really tried to do that. Now, I think Lawrence was a fallen person who made a lot of mistakes. And so I think that you could very easily point out flaws in the story because it is from Lawrence's perspective.
You know, something what I recall from Lawrence of Arabia that I really liked was just his sense of exploration. You know, he obviously was bored there at the gates of the base, but he had this sense, that hunger, that thirst for, you know, not just exploring new lands, but also interacting and bringing new people together. He like I think I remember him like there was this scene I remember where he was like wearing the Arabic clothes for the first time, and he was just like having so much fun. And he was like, "Oh my gosh," just running around. Which that would be cultural appropriation.
It's completely non-PC, this film. It's a shame because it's such a good film.
Yeah. But I mean, it's that idea of like, that's really, I guess a lot of people can connect with. I can connect with is that like not really fully fitting in with your society, you know, and wanting to be able to have that spirit of adventure, that spirit of going out and finding something new. And I think that was really was able to connect with that, which was really, really cool. But yeah, you know, it's, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know what kind of message it told, but it was definitely something that it really spoke to the human experience, I would say.
Agreed. Absolutely agreed. Well, should we move on?
Yeah. What's next?
Okay. Next up, we have Henry V, based upon the Shakespearean play, Henry V. So it's told very much from the British perspective by a great British film director, Kenneth Branagh, who you probably know from directing Thor. And he's an excellent director. The very first shot is he plays the main character. He plays Henry V. And the very first shot is him lighting a match and like going down the staircase holding the match. And it's completely, it stays very true to Shakespeare's play of Henry V. The soliloquies, the rousing speeches stay very true to the great command of the English tongue that Shakespeare had. And it's about how this Henry V goes from being a joker princeling to being a monarch that's worthy of respect by the entire European continent. So it's a worthwhile character study. More than, it's not really a war film. It's just a big long character study about this monarch.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I haven't seen this one. actually, but I mean, I'm pretty familiar with Shakespeare's writings.
So then you'll probably know some of the things that it gets wrong because it's told so much in an English perspective. It's not historically true. I mean, it's based on actual events. Henry V really did fight in France, but it's so English. I'm sure you would say that the French would have a completely different story about this, wouldn't you? Wouldn't you think?
Well, maybe. I mean, the French always have a different story.
Well, okay. You know something about history. Would you know enough to say that Henry V was in the right to invade France?
I don't think that I could speak to that. I mean, can you give me a little bit of a refresher? Are you familiar more with?
Well, I couldn't answer that myself. I think that's a difficult question. But I can say, so Henry V invades France at he's affronted by, both in the movie and play and in real life, he's affronted by the French monarch who thinks of Henry V as a loser who just wants to go out and be playing tennis all the time. And Henry V doesn't like that. And since he is kind of immature, he decides to go to war over it. And there's other things that he sees as affronts, like taking English lands. I think the English stronghold of Calais is one that they assaulted and might have taken. I don't remember if they either assaulted or they took it, or full blown, had a successful siege of Calais. But then again, Calais was on the French mainland. So it makes sense that you would want to have that land. It's basically right in the middle of your country, and it's an English stronghold. But the French and the English were always falling in and out of alliances and going at each other. And just a few decades later, we get Joan of Arc. So what Henry V starts, Joan of Arc finishes, in that she drives the English from the French mainland after Henry V created such great victories that entrenched the English forces and the English monarchy in France.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's really interesting, and just looking back on history, how tied the French and English have always been throughout the years. Because, I mean, even the English language, is in many, many ways evolved from the French language, which is just, very crazy. But like a lot of people don't realize is that at many points throughout history, Britain and the English kings owned more France than the French kings did. They had Gascony and Brittany and Calais and all like large chunks of France. So these are two cultures that are very, very historically tied together and linked together. I'm sure that if a British person and a French person heard that probably right now, they'd be like cringing. But it's true. I mean, just that common heritage that they've had. It's the Normans came over and took over Britain, and then the British went over it, after years after the Normans took over. Those, people that came from that culture went in.
And the Normans, just to clarify, were French.
Right.
Were French kings.
So it's like these people are all sharing common ancestors. And so that's like something that is kind of cool to realize, that they have that link there,
Absolutely. And this film also, we should not fail to bring up one of the best long takes of all time. People that have watched our film, The Extrovert, know that there are a couple of long takes in it. Nothing as amazing because they had so many more resources, but also they had more time. Time is a resource, but I would love to get to that level. And also Kenneth Branagh is amazing as well. So no, not saying that, not trying to make excuses for ourselves that we didn't have enough, but I love long takes. I always try to put them into our films. And Kenneth Branagh has an amazing long take. And just to clarify what a long take is, it's one continuous shot in the middle of a film. So it could be 10 minutes, 11 minutes without cutting. Hitchcock probably takes the record for the longest continual take with rope. He basically shot it 3 long takes. Well, there's other films that have done it in one take, actually, but Hitchcock did it the most famously, where it's just it's basically a play. where this camera glides from scene to scene, and he hides the cut so that you don't even realize it's a cut. But that film is like a play. It's guiding from one stage to another stage, basically. This does not feel like a play. Kenneth Branagh's Henry V is a battle scene that's going on, and it's the aftermath of the battle, actually. It's the aftermath of the battle and showing all the desolation and destruction and death. It's the death and the despair that's been created, and then how the victory comes up and the hope keeps going despite all the despair and death that's happening.
Wow.
In that long take, Kenneth Branagh is carrying one of the main characters in the film, who I believe is Christian Bale, on his back as a kid, because the character had died. And so it's like a long time of this actor carrying another actor on his back as they're trying to march through this incredibly long take and moving take that weaves despair and victory together. So it's incredibly well done. It's cinema masterpiece or cinema masterclass. It's very much worth the watch if you haven't seen Henry V.
Wow, that sounds amazing. Yeah, I'm gonna have to watch that for sure.
Great.
Yeah. We both share that love for long takes.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It's worth the watch. Okay, how about we move on?
Moving on.
I think up next we have a film that's one of your favorites, Pete.
Yeah, David Crockett, King of the Wild Frontier. Yes,
Tell us
sir.
about this film.
So, I mean, this is the film I grew up with, my favorite, longtime favorite. I don't know how many times I watched this as a kid, but it tells the story, obviously, of David Crockett, who is a Texan hero, folk hero in Texas here, he was an American from Tennessee who fought in the Creek and American War against the Indians because his parents were killed by Creek Indians. But he ends up befriending them, and it's a long one thing leads to another. And he's had it with the United States, and he makes his way over to Texas, where he sees people fighting for freedom, and he sees a common identity with them there, and lays down his life for the fight for freedom in Texas. And so I loved this story as a kid, and I still love it now. But it really, really, I think one of the reasons it connected with me so much was because it was a story about where I was from, where I was growing up. And so I used to go outside and pretend, I was Davy Crockett and play out, because it was crazy because, that was the place where he actually was, where he was walking around and fighting. And so for me as a kid, it was just like really cool to know that like, this is my history. This is what, these are my roots. And Walt Disney did a great job of portraying like the just that spirit of adventure, I think. Obviously, I think this Disney movie took a lot of liberties with the historical facts of the story. But in large part, it is based off of autobiography, which is the one that's not by you. Is that a biography?
Biography.
Yeah, biography of Davy Crockett, written by a friend of his. And so obviously then you'll have a lot of that portrayal of Davy Crockett from that perspective in that light. So it's not a super historically accurate movie, but it does portray a lot, I think, of the spirit of Davy Crockett, which is really great.
Absolutely. And something that should be noted about this film is, and it's one of the things that it does actually deal with quite accurately, is the Trail of Tears. I think films that are of this period, and this was 1955, are often accused of whitewashing history, not speaking about the more sordid events that our country has dealt with. And I think this film is an excellent example of how that's not true. People dealt with things that were not good that we've done, but what they did, what Disney was able to do, what Walt Disney was able to do, was to be respectful and positive about the United States of America, while at the same time showing that this was a terrible thing that the United States did. So what happens is the Trail of Tears is what drives Davy Crockett from the United States. He finds out that, and we've spoken about this in past podcasts a little bit, but in this movie, Davy finds out that the president, his old friend, Andrew Jackson, his old friend. Yeah, Old Hickory. His old friend, Andrew Jackson, is going to renege on treaties that Davy Crockett helped to fight to put into place with Indians and move these Indians off of the lands they agreed that they could live on into reservations. And Davy speaks out in the Senate against his own party. In the movie, he does it against his own party. And it's this great scene that they have where he's about to go into the floor of Congress, and someone says, "I warn you, Crockett, you go into that floor and you say what you're going to say, you're committing political suicide." And Crockett, and I'm not sure if this is real or not, but it's great. And Crockett turns around and says, "I'll tell you what I think of your kind of politics." And he slugs the guy. I don't know if that happened, but it really does happen that he goes into Congress and he speaks out against a president. Imagine a Democrat speaking out against Joe Biden on the floor of Congress and saying that what you're doing is wrong. You're breaking a promise to a group that you said. Imagine a Democrat raising that about Afghanistan, for example. They would have just been just like then. Just like it was political suicide for Davy, it would be political suicide for whatever Democrat spoke out.
But he had the courage to do it.
And he had the courage to go and speak on the floor of Congress. And maybe he could have stayed in politics, or maybe not. In the movie, he couldn't have been. In real life, I think it might have been possible for him to stay and kind of be a maverick of his own party. But he had it. He felt so upset and sick at this happening that he took off to Texas. So this is an interesting example of how we dealt with darker issues, darker moments of our history in film, in kids' film, for crying out loud. I mean, it's a film that all people could enjoy, but it's a Disney film, so it's supposed to be something that kids can consume, and obviously we did as kids.
Yeah, and it's the Trail of Tears. Like, this is something that I think that like in schools, like it's something that can be discussed, and this shows us that we can discuss it in a constructive instead of destructive way. Because the United States is something great, it's a great country and we have great ideals, but that doesn't deny the fact that something like the Trail of Tears happened. And we have, and we remember this, and that's a good thing, so that we can learn from it. And it's something, that we do have to be aware of. I mean, I was in Missouri for a good part of last year, and just probably a 10-minute drive away from where I was, there was historical markers, because that was part of the Trail of Tears. And it was just very fascinating to read and see the grounds there where the Native Americans were forced off their homeland and sent deeper into, unknown territory in America. And Davy Crockett was, just like such a hero to stand against that and to have no part in that. And I think that drove him to Texas, which is a great thing for me, because now he's a great Texan hero. And so we get to share in the story of this great man.
That's right. Well, shall we move on to another great story?
Sure. What do we got next?
Next up, For Greater Glory, Cristeros.
Cristeros.
So tell me about this one, Pete. I think this is one of your suggestions.
Yeah, well, this is a really great movie too. You can see from the...
Peter O'Toole shows up again.
we got some big actors there. Peter O'Toole shows up again. This time,
Lawrence of Arabia is old now.
But yeah, like Oscar Isaac, he's been in a bunch of shows. He's been in a bunch of Disney Plus shows lately, and Star Wars, obviously, and a whole bunch of big actors. So this is no tiny little low budget movie. But it tells the story of one of the Catholic persecutions, the persecutions of the Catholic Church in Mexico, which probably we've spoken about this a lot in the past, but Mexico in all of Latin America is deeply Catholic, deeply Catholic culture that's heavily influenced by Our Lady of Guadalupe. Our Lady of Guadalupe is the embodiment of Latin America, the embodiment of Mexican culture. And so, but throughout the ages, we've had so many persecutions in Mexico of the Catholic Church. And I think that is probably because of, government always wants to replace the role of religion in people's hearts. And so when you have a culture that's this deeply Catholic, the government is going to be very jealous very easily and very quickly. And so this story, Cristiada, or For Greater Glory, tells the story of the Cristeros, which were Catholics who fought back against the government. And so this was, it's a fascinating point in history where whole portions of Mexico were just broke away from the central Mexican government because they were persecuting the Catholic Church. And so this story is fascinating. It portrays very vividly and very graphically the struggle of Mexicans, Catholic Mexicans, fighting for religious liberty, taking it not just into, but when the government sends in the armies, they fight back. They have the courage of their conviction to actually take up arms and to fight for their religious freedom.
Yeah. Well, it's a good reminder for us today. One of the things I wanted to speak about in a negative sense was the terrible school shooting that happened last week, and speak about how our public schools, our government schools, have just become a magnet for tragedy in every single way. And maybe we can speak a little bit about the history of government schools at another time, maybe when it's not so fresh. But the backlash that we're seeing right now is for people to want to outlaw guns, to outlaw the right to bear arms. And what we have to remember is that it's not so far-fetched that governments take your liberty, your life, your possessions, your ability to be a Christian, but they take that away from you. This film was made in 2012, and it's about something that happened in the early 1900s. It's not much more than 100 years ago, and it's not very far away. I mean, from where you and I, Pete, Pete, is maybe 300 miles away that this was happening. Mm-hmm. So it's not crazy. I think there are factions of this country that would belittle the idea that, and we should talk to someone on the other side about this. Maybe we can do that in a future podcast, because I think it's something we should talk about with people on the other side of this debate. But it's not far-fetched. It's not crazy to think that the government that did that almost 100 years ago, around 300 miles away from this spot where we're talking in good old Texas of the USA, it's not so far-fetched that the government could do that here. And what is the ability, and the ability of the government to overreach lasts as long as the citizens allow it to. So if we do not have the means to stop government overreach, then there's nothing stopping government overreach. However, if we are a warlike people that is capable of standing up for our rights, standing up for our freedom to practice religion. And that is something that the government bullies take that into account when they measure their chances of success. So it makes sense that we should have some plausible way to defend ourselves, to defend our way of life. And I'm willing to debate it very much so. Say, okay, what is right and what is overreach as far as what we can, as citizens, should be able to bear. I would be on the side of saying there's not much that's overreaching for us. Maybe some sort of bump stock things which shooters have used, mass shooters have used in the past. But I think that this movie is a great reminder, especially right now, of what can happen and what has happened very recently and very close by.
Yeah, and I mean, of course, it hits home very close to all of us because it happened to children, and that's one of the most horrifying things that can happen. And also, of course, it's even closer to home because it's here in Texas, it's fellow Texans. And so it's an ongoing debate that is going on in Texas and throughout the country. But that's what I think is important, is to be able to have, like you were saying, like we should have a guest on here to have this discussion, because these things need to be discussed. They need to be debated. I don't think there's like quite like a simple answer. And so, yeah, what I think you get a lot of candidates and politicians who are just grandstanding on the issue. And that helps nobody, it helps nobody to grandstand and to uphold your own political stance. Like we have Beto, coming out and yelling and screaming and making a spectacle of himself, specifically because he sees this as an opportunity to advance his own political career. And so I think you see that a lot with a lot of people. They see this as an opportunity to make a point that they have already been arguing. And I don't think it's obviously not the right response at all.
No, and in Robert O'Rourke's mind, in Robert's case, he sees the writing on the wall that Texas is not going to vote for him. So it's desperation. It's incredible desperation, and it's ugly. It's ugly to see that type of desperation in a politician. But in any case, we wanted to be positive here. So maybe we're running a little bit. I'm sorry, folks. We started late, so we don't have as much time to go through all these movies. But what if we do like a speed round, Pete? What do you think?
Get the clock going.
Okay. Unbroken is the next film we had on the list. It's one that I actually just started watching this weekend. My father-in-law put it on the TV, and I loved it. I had to go to bed halfway through it because it was already really late, and I'm old now and I'm a parent, and I can't stay up as late as I would like to. What?
Not a parent. I always fall asleep.
Well, it's just that I know that the 6 a.m. wake up call time that Austin gives us is going to be there, whether it's a holiday or a weekend or not. So I can't afford to not sleep when sleep is an option. But in any case, back to Unbroken, a wonderful story about a POW in World War II in the Asian Pacific theater, where I've gotten up to the point where he just gets captured by the Japanese, which is about an hour and a half in. And he is a fighter pilot who jumps back into his story as he was growing up. He was grew up with an immigrant Italian family, and it's so interesting to see them portrayed as people that are not wanted in the neighborhood. They're like, people already don't like us, so we need to be extra good. And this kid is a problem until he finds out about sports, and he directs all that energy into sports. Although there's incredible Christian overtones in it. It starts off with a picture of him in church. I mean, they're Italian, of course, they're Catholic, and it has a picture of the crucifix, and a lot of it is his relationship, at least up to the hour and a half that I've seen, with people of faith. Because even though he's not a faithful person, there keeps on having characters around him that are faithful. So it's a very interesting story that I hope I get to finish one day. Another, we would be remiss if we didn't bring up The Passion of the Christ by Mel Gibson, which is an incredibly faithful retelling of an actual gospel account of what really happened to our Lord. And it is something that is worth remembering, that this is a historical event. We're often so far afield with theology, or, well, this is really a parable, or this is, this represents something different, when we forget, like, Jesus was someone who actually walked the earth and went through all of this. And this is a great reminder of that, don't you think, Pete?
Yeah, it's a very vivid, very tangible depiction of the crucifixion and the passion, which is very easy to lose sight of, even as Christians, just the reality of the crucifixion, which Mel Gibson does a masterful job here of portraying.
He's a master. Hats off to Mel. He's a master. For all his other craziness, he knows how to direct the film.
Yeah.
All right, moving on. 1917. Peter, maybe could you, I think this is actually one of your fave films. Can you tell us a little bit about this one?
Oh, yeah. This is a beautiful depiction of two soldiers struggling and fighting to survive in World War I, which is, we have so many stories about World War II, which is great, but we don't have as many good stories about World War I. And so this really delves into just I would say the trauma and the shock of World War I, and how these people were coming from a completely different world. And so what I really love about this film is how it depicts the beauty and the simplicity of the old world, and the worlds that these people are coming from, and how they cling on to that, and how they see signs of hope and beauty throughout incredible suffering and incredible darkness. And so I just feel like this movie does a great, great job of portraying beauty as something that these people hold on to and hold on to hope for, despite just the horrors of World War I. So definitely recommend this one. Love it.
Okay, so the last four we have are all World War II flicks in the European theater, but they're all told from radically different perspectives. So I think they are all worth a watch, even if you have had your fill of World War II. These will give you a different perspective. This is a recent one that came out that I loved. I actually hosted a movie night in the middle of COVID, a drive-in movie night. For an event that we had at our church where I was working, and in the middle of Hollywood, and it was just a blast. Everyone loved it, showing good old-fashioned virtue. This guy that Tom Hanks plays, he's a Christian that believes in his faith, and he lives it out to the best that he can. And he's also really good at his job. He knows how to handle a warship. He knows how to deal with submarines, and he's one of the few people that really knows how. And it shows by how he's able, even though he's outgunned, he's able to protect a group of frigates full of just people. They're not warships. He's able to protect them from getting blown up, and saves thousands of lives. And it's an incredibly thrilling film that I highly recommend if you haven't seen it.
Yeah. That was a good time over in Hollywood.
I know. We had a blast.
At the height of authoritarian lockdowns.
Yeah, in the height of authoritarian lockdowns, we were able to go out and have fun. Good times. Okay, speaking of good times, Downfall, the great German film that is about Hitler's last days. And even if you think that you haven't seen this film, you probably have. Peter, do you remember that old scene that went by? I think it was like the first meme scene that was ever made about Hitler screaming at his aides, and they subtitle it with something crazy.
Yeah, if you've seen a guy with a mustache, also known as Hitler, screaming and yelling and losing it on a bunch of German officers because the new Star Wars sucks, then you've
or the traffic in LA is horrible or something like that. It's so good. Any case, this film is also really good. It is a chilling retelling of how everything's falling apart for Hitler and how this man that people thought basically was a god to those that were closest to him see that he does not have an answer and he's probably kind of insane, which is probably a terrible, like if you've hitched your wagon to Hitler and you think that this guy is the savior basically of your race, this is a tough time. And this really represents the darkness that these followers were experiencing as they see Hitler falling. It's a brilliant film, a perspective that's worth checking out.
Right.
Speaking of another perspective that's worth checking out, Dunkirk. And I, as a kid, read a book that I loved about Dunkirk, written by John Tunis, who was famous for writing baseball stories. And it was quite a departure for him to write a World War II novel. So I was introduced to this story as a kid through my great baseball writer author that I loved reading. And it's a story about how a bunch of civilians saved the English army from complete and utter destruction at the hands of the German army as the French forces had folded completely and Germany was pushing up the flank of England. They were about ready to just be wiped off the face of the map. And that would have been the end of the war. If they'd been able to knock England out at that point, the US was not ready to engage. So Germany would have won, but for the fact that our intrepid British civilian corps managed to organize a civilian armada of ships to come and pick up the soldiers. And there's heroism all around, which this film brilliantly catches. It's a great historical flick.
Yeah, told in the masterful style of old Chris Nolan.
That's right.
Using everybody.
I loved it. I wasn't confused.
It was good.
Don't worry, Chris Nolan. I got you. All right. Last but not least, Schindler's List is a wonderful film, heartbreaking in every way. And here you have the hand of the girl in the red coat, that elusive character that shows the death of innocence. It's Spielberg's greatest film, and I don't think that's any underestimation. It's an incredible film that shows a depth of feeling that Spielberg really does not have much elsewhere. Spielberg is an incredible technician and master, but this one, he really dives deep and is able to show what he's got on the inside. And I find it a brilliant film. Have you seen it, Peter?
Yes. Yeah.
What's your take on it?
Well, I remember really what struck me was his portrayal of like Nazis kind of almost on the brink of seeing the humanity of the Jews that they had in the concentration camps. I remember they had like that, that evil Nazi officer who was like, very interested in that Jewish girl. And like he has moments where he's like almost seen her as a human being. And then he kind of like catches himself and it's like, no, this is not a human being. What am I thinking? Yeah. But just that. And then also how Schindler at the end kind of like, breaks down because he's like, I did all of this, but I didn't do enough,
That's brilliant. That's Liam Neeson's best scene. So Liam Neeson plays a German who's very well-to-do, very rich, but he also has a conscience. And he finds a way where he can save people, the Jews that are going to concentration camps, by basically buying their freedom. And there's a scene at the end, which is heartbreaking, which we shouldn't give away, where he's done so much throughout the whole film. And it's him breaking down relating how he wishes he could have done more. He wishes he could have found a way to save one more person. And it's a heartbreaking and beautiful moment that's worth the watch. Most people have probably already seen it, so we probably aren't giving anything away. That's the speed round. Pete, any last takeaways?
I mean, I love all of these films. The ones I haven't seen, I'm going to have to go and check out. I highly recommend all of them to everybody. But these are great stories. And I think the common thread you see throughout was there a lot of them are most of them are they very rooted in the actual stories and the actual text about what happened.
That's right.
And it speaks to how history is a great story.
If you stay true to the actual occurrence of history, you tell a better story. Like, you don't need to take crazy artistic license with the actual events that happened. I think the films that really go off the rails historically are the ones that take flights of fancy and they try to push their own agenda. They try to push what they think should have happened instead of what really happened. And that is where we get the boring, trite, kingdom of heaven sort of things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a bad one. I don't recommend that.
Right. That's it.
A lot of great stories here. Thank you. I like this.
Thank you. Thank you. I hope you all enjoyed watching us. I know it's a bit of a change up, a bit of a curveball, but we wanted to speak about something fun. And I think every once in a while that's worth doing, because there's a lot of good things out there and we could always focus on the bad, but what's the sense in that, There's
a lot of good in the world.
Yeah.
It's true.
Well, maybe next week we'll talk about something bad again. Who knows? We'll find out. All right, everyone. For Peter and I'm JP, and we'll see you all next time.
See you next time.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Pinedo Brothers Podcast, an artist podcast for Catholics. We hope you enjoyed it, and if so, please consider subscribing, and commenting below. That really helps. This episode was edited and recorded by me, JP. Makeup was done by no one, if you couldn't tell. The Pinedo Brothers are Catholic filmmaking brothers working to revitalize the world of Catholic art through film. For more information on us, check us out at pinedobrothers.com. Thanks again.